Thank you very much. What I want to talk to you about today is designing experiences. And what I would like to do in order to get through this subject is to tell you a little story about this guy here. Now, this is me in 1993. And at the time, I was living in Dallas in Texas, and I was having two of the best years of my life, making a living organizing illegal underground raves. Now, who here knows... No. Now, who here knows what a rave is? Yeah? Okay, for those of you who don't, now, raves were something that came about at the end of the 1980s in the UK. And they mainly started happening in the northern industrial regions. And what had happened, the previous 10 years in the UK had seen the decline of our industrial capacity, leaving huge numbers of abandoned buildings, factories, warehouses, mills, industrial units. And at the same time, leaving millions and millions of young people, old people and young people, but particularly young people, unemployed and basically disengaged from the world. And we'd also just seen the end of an enormous financial and property boom, not that different from the one that has just collapsed recently. And I think during that boom, a lot of these young people were starting to feel very, very disconnected from the way that the world had become. And so what happened is they started putting these two things together. So the nightclubs and the bars and the entertainment that existed for these young people at the time was kind of an exclusive world. It was a world of dress codes, of hostile entry staff. It was a world of exclusivity. And instead what these kids started doing is they started taking over these buildings and organizing these huge all-night parties. They would bring in a sound system, they would bring in a generator, and they would basically dance until the police turned up or until the sun came up. And these were a fantastic phenomenon. And I spent basically a couple of years of my life following these things around. And they were technically unlicensed. In fact, they were fully illegal. And so obviously the police used to put quite a lot of effort into trying to shut them down. And the organizers, the organizers developed ways of avoiding this. And the usual way that this happened was you would keep the location completely secret until the night of the party, and then the location would be released with a phone number. So what would happen is us and thousands of people like me would gather in various locations around the country, usually at a service station on the side of a motorway late at night, and they would be taken over by these young ravers, people looking a lot like me. And you would find, you'd walk in and there would be a bank of telephones, and these people would be there dialing this phone number over and over again. There'll be a row of ravers dialing this number over and over again. This is in the days well before mobile phones, well before that kind of technology, even before redial. And so you'd be there, piece of paper in one hand, dialing away. And finally, eventually, somebody would manage to get through, and they'd get the directions. And they would throw up their hand, everybody would abandon that place, jump into their cars, and start following this one car who knew where it was going. And so you'd be driving through the night in a convoy of sometimes 300 or 400 cars in the northern industrial parts of the UK, desperately hoping that you wouldn't lose the car just in front of you, because if you did, then there was absolutely no chance. And very often what would happen is we would get to the party just as it was being shut down, or you'd get there and the police would have stopped it. But occasionally, you would arrive, and the exciting thing about it was that the party itself was a fantastic thing, but the journey to the party was also a huge part of it, and the journey to the party was really an adventure. And eventually you would reach the party, but that journey was a huge and significant part. Now, this eventually led me to getting involved in doing this myself. So I ended up, for reasons I won't go into, in Dallas in Texas. And between me and a couple of friends, over the course of a couple of years, we organized about 30 of these parties. And again, we would take over beautiful old industrial buildings, a bit like this one. This was one of my favorites. Now, this place used to be a bomb factory back before the Second World War, and then it became a a refrigeration warehouse before being abandoned when we took it over. And over that time, we had between 200 and 2,000 people coming to our parties on a regular basis. And they just grew and grew. And every week, every time we did a new one, more people would come back and they'd bring their friends. And to me, that says that we were doing something right. And what's interesting is in the work that I do today, in the work that I do helping companies with products and services and to develop those products and services, I think back to the time when we were there, and I think, what was the product we were selling? You know, was it the sound system? Was it the music? Was it any of those things? And I think the truth of it is, there was no product, right? What we were actually selling was pure experience. And so, in designing these experiences for those people, I learned a lot of things, and I learned a lot of things that I still really talk to my customers about today. And so really deep down, the secret title of my talk, which I didn't want to share with the guys at TED, is everything that I know about designing experiences, I learned organizing illegal underground warehouse parties. So what did I learn? Well, if I had to sum it up in 3 words, it would be know your customers, okay? Now, when I say that, I don't mean do some market research. I don't mean do some customer satisfaction surveys. I don't mean read some market analysis. What I mean is get out there and meet them. These are my customers. And in that time, in the time leading up to me becoming involved in this, I spent what in the user experience world we might say some intensive and in-depth ethnographic and contextual research. I went to a lot of parties. And in many ways, when it came time to organize my own, I was organizing them for these people that I cared about, but I was also organizing them for myself. And that's interesting because in the terms that we use today, that would make me what they call a user entrepreneur, somebody who finds a need, satisfies that need for themselves, and then takes that to market. And the Kaufman Foundation, which is a foundation based around entrepreneurship over in the US, recently did a survey, and they found that up to 50% of innovative US startups are founded by user entrepreneurs, people out there doing what we call scratching your own itch. Sounds unpleasant. But in many situations, that isn't the case. In many situations, we're inside an organization, and we are having to innovate around markets that aren't exactly ours. So if you are in that situation, my advice to you is get out there and meet your customers. Really spend time with them. You know, get to know their pain, get to know their fears, get to know the people they share things with, get to know the problems they're trying to solve in their life, get to see the world through their eyes. And in that way, you can understand how it is that your product or your service is going to fit in with their lives. And really what that means is walking in their shoes. And another way of putting that is understanding their context, understanding what it is. And I think Alex talked about context earlier. It's understanding at every point in their encounter with your product or your service, what is their context? What's their context of use? Context is a tricky thing, and it's got lots of different aspects, but in some ways it's reasonably simple. Where are they and what's going on in their mind? So here's a good example of something that isn't particularly well done from a context point of view. This is an ad on the back of a bus in London. It's not really relevant what the ad is for, but what I think is interesting is in the bottom left-hand corner there's a QR code. Do we know what QR codes are? So what do you do with a QR code? Well, you take out your mobile phone, you look at it, and you take a photo while you're driving along behind this bus. And I don't really think that people need to be doing that kind of thing. Here's another great example. This is another ad. This is on the Tube, on the Underground in London. And this is an ad telling people, don't take out your valuables in public, right? Keep valuable things hidden when you're in a public place, particularly on the Tube. Once again, there's a QR code. So there you are, taking your valuable mobile phone to take a photo of this. And because you're in the Underground, there isn't even a mobile signal, so it doesn't even work. But here's a really nice example. So I was walking around East London a few months back, and I spotted this. And I couldn't work it out. And then I realized what this is actually a sign on the entrance to a warehouse that sells tires. And it became abundantly clear that what was happening was that people who were making deliveries to this warehouse, large trucks that were making deliveries to this warehouse, were reversing in, and they didn't realize the warehouse has a very low roof. So they're reversing too far, and they were basically smashing the roof. So that's what the sign says. And what they understood when they created this sign is that the people who are going to be reading it, their context of use is they're sitting in their truck, and they're looking at this in their mirrors. So let's make it backwards so that they can see it. And that was a really nice example. But I think taking it forward from understanding your customers, understanding their context of use, the thing that it leads you to next is that when you're designing a product, you really need to design the whole experience. It's very easy when you're designing something to think about the product as being this thing contained within physical boundaries. But actually, these things exist outside of their physical world. And you need to really think about the beginnings and the ends, the journey through this experience, the way that I acquire the product, the way I hear about the product, what happens when I get it, what happens when it goes wrong. And there's a company that does this really, really well, and that's Zappos. Now, Zappos is a company that sells shoes. Now, lots of people sell shoes, but what Zappos have done is they've really, really focused on this amazing end-to-end experience. And they start with the experience of contacting their sales center. And their sales center agents are encouraged to really engage with their customers, to talk for as long as they like, to chat to them on the phone if they want to, really help them in that experience. So that beginning is an amazing experience and different from many companies that you'll ever deal with. On top of that, they deliver incredibly quickly and they deliver for free. Very often they deliver ahead of the schedule that they promised you. It's another opportunity to surprise people and to bring something beautiful to them. Then you get the choice of the shoes arrive, you can choose which ones you want, and then you can send back the ones that you don't like. And that's their kind of closure experience in that situation. And they do this fantastically well. And they were recently sold to Amazon for, I think, $900 million. So clearly there is business merit in thinking about the whole experience. So how did we do this? Well, back in my rave organizing days, this was my favorite warehouse. This was a warehouse that we used. This was the one I showed you previously. It was beautiful, this gorgeous sort of post-industrial architecture. And this bit here, you can see this would have been the main dance floor. This is it during the day. Now, when people came to our parties, they had been through this journey, What we were trying to create is something that didn't feel like a party, something that felt like an adventure. So again, obviously, we weren't entirely legal either. So we did everything we could to avoid the police showing up. So we also used map points, and we used phones, and we used everything that we could to make sure that we could get away with it, basically. But we also understood that those things, they were part of the adventure, They were part of the whole experience. And so by the time you reached this particular location, you'd already been through a couple of stages, and you'd arrived there with all your friends, and you were starting to get really excited because you'd found it, and here it was. Now, the entrance to the dance floor is actually this big door here. That takes you straight into that room I just showed you here. And from a commercial point of view, I guess the sensible thing would have been, they've arrived here, get their money off them and get them through the door. But we really wanted to play with that feeling of adventure, that feeling that you were on this journey. So we would make people park around the front, and then we bring them around the back, and we make this little door here. That would be the entrance. And we created this, it looks weird, kind of scary, slightly freaky. And you'd go up those dark little stairs, and you'd have no idea what to expect, but you could hear this party, and you knew there was something going on, and it was starting to get louder, and your excitement was building. And you'd go up these kind of dark little stairs, and you'd end up in this little antechamber. Now, this is it during daylight. It looks horrible. It looks like a crack den, right? But at night, we lit it up, and it looks like this kind of, that door is about this high, right? And it looks like a little kind of fairy door, So you duck down into it, and you walk through this magical little half-height room that actually used to keep the lift machinery. And you can hear this party, and you can see that something's happening, but you still don't quite know where you're going. And then you drop out onto one of these platforms. Again, this is it during the day. And down below, you can kind of still see this party. You're starting to get glimpses of things. You're starting to get a feel for it. There's people here, and you can hear this party building. And then finally, you move out onto this walkway, and we basically made you walk all the way around the entire party. So you can see the whole thing from above. You can see it all going off. And right at the very end, you drop down into the dance floor, and you're totally ready to go. And that excitement, that kind of building up of the experience was a huge part, I think, of the reason why people kept coming back and kept coming back to our events. And we would really work hard to create that kind of stuff. We understood at that point that the context was you didn't just want to get to the party, you wanted to have the whole experience. You wanted to really enjoy every single part of it. And the actual bit in which you were in the party on the dance floor was just one part of that. At the other end of the experience is the end of the party. So by the time the party ended, you might have been there 5 or 6 hours, you've been dancing for quite a while, you're probably pretty tired, you're probably a little bit dehydrated, your blood sugar's probably a bit low. So we'd put on the last song, we'd throw open the doors, the sunlight would come streaming in, and we'd walk around and we'd give everyone a little piece of ice-cold fruit and a lovely little flower, and they'd walk out and we'd take them straight out the back door. You didn't need to go through the maze this time. You're straight out the back door, there's your car, and you're home and safe, and it's happily ever after. And what was amazing is, when I was putting this talk together, I scanned in a lot of photos from back in those days and put them up on Facebook. And this was 20 years ago, 19 years ago. And a couple of days later, I found I was getting bombarded by emails and messages from people who'd been at our parties, people I had no idea were even still around. and they were, and they all are. Very few fatalities. And they were writing to share their experiences of those times. And they were writing to thank us for having helped them share those experiences and those things that they'd had in their lives. And I was hugely touched by this. I was, quite moved by this. And so I guess my challenge for you guys today is this. In the work that you guys are all doing, the experiences that you're creating, the business that you're building, but fundamentally the experiences that you guys are designing, how are you going to make sure that maybe in 19 years' time, somebody might want to write to you and thank you for it? That's it. Thank you very much.